welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee of the 12th of October. If I could take apologies for absence first, please.
Apology from Councillor Oliver James.
There are a couple of members I know will need to leave a little earlier to go to other meetings. Thank you all of those for notifying me in advance. If I could have next agenda item 2, the disclosures of interests, please. Any disclosures? Not seeing any. Oh yeah, I can see hands. Jeff Arena, Councillor Jeff Arena. I can't hear you, Councillor Arena.
Thank you. Item 4. I'm a governor of 2 schools and therefore one of the people responsible for the management of absence policy of the schools and also for the school budget, which covers employment of supply staff. So it's just a personal issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Leslie Walton.
Yeah, I'm a governor of Dillon Thomas School, not part of the finance subcommittee, but certainly would be involved in absence control, management, whatever the word.
Councillor Walton. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, I was with governor of 2 schools. Personal interest.
Councillor David Halliwell.
I'm a governor of the school and on their finance subcommittee as well.
Are there any more hands? Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I better also say I'm a governor of 2 schools myself as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other hands?
Yeah, just the same interest, Chair, being a school governor.
Okay, you Sam. Not seeing any more, but just bear with me while I look down the list. No, I didn't. No. Okay, thank you very much.
Chair, just as well, I'm a governor of 2 schools as well.
Okay then, thank you, Councillor Mike White.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask another question? In the scrutiny report, I'm a chair of one of the working groups. Do I need to declare that?
Tracy, can I have your view on that, please?
No, I don't, Councillor Walton, I don't think you need to declare that as an interest.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Councillor Walton. Okay, then if we take it that anyone that's the governor of the school then have declared the interest appropriately. If we can move on to the minutes. First, it will be the minutes of the 24th of August. And if you could, for accuracy, and if you have any comments, please stop me as we go along. So page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. If they're true record and accurate, can I have some hands showing, please, so they can be approved? Thank you, Councillor Rayner. Thank you, Councillor Jeff Jones, and the others there. If we can move on to the minutes of the 14th of September, again for the same reason, for accuracy, and any comments. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, 10, page 11, page 12, and page 13. I'll accept those as a true and accurate record.
Sorry, could I just say, please, Madam Chairman, I'm pretty sure I sent in my apologies for that meeting,
Okay.
but they're not recorded. If I didn't, I apologise for not apologising because I should have apologised. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Patterson. Okay, if we can approve this as well, the number of hands up approving those minutes. Then if we can move on, we've now got the agency staff audit report update, and I believe Adrian is going to take us through the salient points of this report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. As you mentioned, at the June committee meeting, it was requested that an update be provided on the employment of agency workers in the council for this meeting. Of course, recognising that particularly at this time, there's a continued requirement to provide frontline services in such areas as social care and waste management, particularly during this COVID crisis, but also recognising our intention to recruit into permanent employment roles wherever possible. At the June meeting, there were a number of questions raised, which we're attempting to address today, and in the update paper. And for that reason, Chris Howells, Head of Waste Management, Parks and Cleansing Operations, and Brian Rolls, Head of Planning and Resources, are in attendance to support and address any questions for their particular areas. In relation to some of the questions that were raised at the June meeting, I can advise that in relation to the contract spend with companies, there is at the moment a competitive retendering exercise that's been undertaken by a procurement section with a view to awarding a contract to commence by April 2022. In relation to our agency workers policy, that policy has now been in place since February 2021, and that clearly sets out the roles and responsibilities of the manager and the management of agency workers, and also the responsibility of myself as the HR and OD manager in monitoring and implementing the policy. And in terms of the policy itself, I can assure you, and I've received assurances that the policy is being complied with by all areas that are employing agency workers. Some of the key messages from the last meeting were that there was a sort of recognition that the figures were that were provided were a snapshot in time. So therefore, in this report, we've attempted to provide sort of details in terms of the cost and numbers on a monthly basis, and that's obviously reflected in the report, but also reflected in the narrative for each service area is to indicate where those agency workers are employed on a full-time basis or on a part-time or hourly basis. The spend figures that we've include details of consultancy costs and provision of the Welsh Government social care bonus that we were instrumental in providing to the social care sector, not only for our employees but so to say third-party providers. But the majority spend, as indicated in the report, are with staff line, particularly in our Place Directorate and in our SD, particularly in the support to social services. Further analysis has identified that in amongst those figures, in addition to agency workers employed by those two contract providers, there are small pockets, very small numbers, one or two in different areas that have been employed by different agency providers, and we're currently working with those service areas to identify whether that is in fact the right employment model for those agency workers, should there be a requirement for them to be continued to employed. Before I move on to Chris and to Brian, just to reflect that in social services there has been a small increase in agency worker provision in the last in August, and that is solely due to the need to cover for frontline service provision in our social care sector. In terms of sickness absence, also we have appointed a number of management of attendance officers to directly support directorates in the management of absence, sickness absence, and that will include, particularly moving forward, identifying areas where agency workers have been engaged with a view to ensuring that sickness costs and agency worker costs are taken into account, and also ensuring the provision of frontline services. In highways and transportation, no agency workers have been used to cover sickness. However, we do recognise that there are some roles that have been used to cover for other reasons, primarily for vacancies. And again, there are active measures being undertaken now to recruit individuals into those roles to avoid agency worker costs in the future and to secure permanent employment in those roles. So before I move on, then, are there any questions on that aspect before I move on to Chris and Brian?
Okay, I've got two hands up, Councillor Peter Black and Councillor
I'm happy to wait till the end of the report, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Peter. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, really, while Adrian obviously raised the issue of giving support with our staff, just wondering regarding our policy on redeployment and training, because some staff perhaps might not be able to come back to their own roles, but for provisions to be made in those areas. Is this been fed across all departments, Adrian? Can you...
So Councillor, are we talking about where people are returning from absence?
Perhaps long-term sick or unable to perhaps carry out their original duties, but to try and get them back into work and into employment.
Yeah, most certainly. Whatever an individual, whether it's COVID related or not, we'd have proper arrangements in place to enable their return to work, making reasonable adjustments, seeking to find alternative work if they're not able to go back into their previous role. So as a general principle, Councillor, we would always do that anyway.
And that's rolled out across all departments, is it?
Rolled out across all departments, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Chris, am I okay to bring you in now at this point? Chris Hall? Yeah.
Yeah, sure, Adrian.
Thank you.
In terms of the waste area, I suppose some of the key points to raise. It's a service area where we need to deliver that service to the same quality and quantity on a daily basis. So if we have a crew who were absent for any reason, that then would result in 2,000 properties not having their waste collected that particular day. So it's not something which the rest of the crews can absorb, or indeed can wait until crews are back in work. So whilst we have a high level of agency supporting us, it's because of that essential nature. I think it's also an area which has changed a lot over the years. And I think at one point, as recycling increased, the resources to collect the waste in a different way increased significantly. And that resulted in, whilst things were settling down, that resulted in a lot of agency staff being used. And over the last 4 years, I know that we've taken on 64 permanent employees, the vast majority of those through traineeships, to ensure that we give training opportunities to our staff, and we are employing staff with a wide knowledge of the waste industry. And to continue on that vein, we still have about 30 permanent roles which we are still to fill. We have, over the last couple of months, we've taken on a further 10 trainees, with a plan to take on another 10 trainees early in the new year. Which then will just leave us 10 permanent positions to fill, with a further trainee position probably this time next year. So that's the kind of the permanent positions dealt with. Then the majority of agency staff that we use are to cover sort of daily absences, and that may be through sickness or holidays. And lastly, we also need to use agency staff where we have fluctuations in workload. So we have seasonal fluctuations for things like garden waste, where we have tried to use seasonal contracts and find that they haven't worked very well for us, because a lot of our agency staff would prefer to carry on the agency rather than a seasonal contract and then have to rejoin the agency as a new starter. And we have a number of functions which we undertake on a trial basis, and then those trials can finish. So again, in terms of the most effective way to resource those trials is using a well-established agency. So I think they are the key points as to where we were, how far we progressed, and which direction we're heading in.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've got some hands up, so should we take the queries from that section of the report? I can see our leader, Rob Stewart, has got his hand up. Rob?
Chair, if it's okay with you, if I come in at the end, because I just some general points I wanted to make, if that's okay.
Okay. Councillor Jennifer Rayner.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. My query was about the number of permanent positions as yet unfilled, and it's good to hear how you've been looking at the possibility for increasing the number of permanent positions. What I'd like to know is, having decided a post could be permanent, how long is it that you spend trying to find someone who can step straight in before you move towards deciding you've got to go down the traineeship route?
For the last probably 3 years, at the entry-level positions, we decided to use the traineeship as the main route through to employment. Rather than go for direct employment, we'd rather do it through the traineeship, which provides the staff with a qualification, enables us to have the time to invest in them, to give them the wider knowledge, and then the successful trainees then would slot into a position at the end of their traineeship. They were 9-month traineeships, and they were to an MVQ level 2.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at this report. I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but on paragraph 3, the Waste Parks and Cleansing Service, there's 168 agency workers in August, but on the next but one page, on page 18, only 100.5 are accounted for. I'm just wondering where the other 67.5 are.
Yeah, I think that's why it's really important to try to give the information behind the figures, because figures themselves can be misleading. The larger figure is the number of different individual agency workers employed during that period. So if you have one position that you need to fill in a week, if you use 5 different agency staff, that's 5 people, but it's still only one position you're filling. So the 100 is the full-time equivalent positions that we're filling with agency staff, even though we might have used a number of different agencies for the same position throughout the month.
So 168 is in double counting then?
Effectively, yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Leslie Walton.
Thanks, Chair. It's on point 2.4 on page 15. I'm just wondering, I think before now we've mooted the idea, would it be possible for the council to have its own in-house agency staff? No, it wouldn't be agency staff, would it? But a supply staff stock, as it were, because obviously one of the big costs involved is always going to be if we are then contracting out to external agencies. And as I say, I thought we have mentioned this before, but before you answer, can I just say I'm very pleased with some of the progress that has been made since June. It's obvious from this report there's been a lot of work done behind the scenes, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. You're quite right there, Councillor Walton. We have spoken about the possibility of Swansea City Council having an agency bank of its own. It was a bank, staff bank. I don't think that was ever progressed. I don't know if you want to come back on that one.
It's probably more of a corporate response required for that, as being a corporate position. However, I suppose that if the authority had a bank of staff, if they were on zeros contracts, then that's something I know the authority is really keen to avoid, and I've taken a position that zeros contracts should be avoided at all costs. And I suppose the benefit of using a wider agency is that they have a number of employers that they can place their agency staff with. So then it potentially could give more continuity of work for the agency staff involved. So whilst I haven't, from a service point of view, looked at the potential of having an authority bank of staff, I would imagine from a practical point of view there would be a number of problems with it. Adrian, I don't know from your point of view whether you've looked at in any detail.
Yes, I'd support your comments there, Chris, and we have had these discussions with the procurement section as well, you know, in terms of actually resourcing should we say, a consistent source of agency workers, and particularly around the cost effectiveness. It's been sort of, the view is that it would be more cost effective and more appropriate, if you like, in getting the right resources in to use, you know, established agency providers such as Staffline and RSD. There wasn't really any cost effectiveness as far as I'm aware of having an internal bank of staff, which is primarily in Chris's area, because that's where the largest number of agency workers are. And I think, you know, experience has shown that use of an established agency, for the reasons that Chris has stated, has been the most effective way of sourcing agency workers.
Thank you. I've got quite a number of hands up now, so I'll take them as I'm seeing them on the screen, if that's okay. Councillor Mike Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, hi, Chris. When you say you're taking on trainees, is their age a factor in your decision to take on these trainees? As I have been in conversation with several over 40s agency staff who have been working off and on for the authority for the last 10, 12 years, and they keep applying for traineeships and they keep getting turned down. I just wondered if the age was a factor, and why when agency staff wanted to be employed full time, they're not getting anywhere with it. That's all, basically. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, age is not a factor, certainly, in who we recruit. It is about capability to undertake the role. And we've had trainees who have been well into their 50s through the trainee programme, so certainly age is not a factor. I guess one of the factors is if we take on, I think last time we took on 20 trainees and we had over 200 applicants. So, you know, it's a very competitive area. We offer training to all our agency staff as sell yourself training to help them to complete application forms and support in running through interviews, which potentially they won't have done before or not for a long time. But ultimately, we need to then stick to our HR policies in terms of recruitment. But we've had usually probably 80% of the trainees that we recruited have been agency staff that have had experience with us, with a small number of people who have come from the outside without that experience. And let's say there's a mixture of age usually.
Thank you.
Julie Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies if there's any feedback from my microphone. Thank you for taking our comment on board from the previous meeting, Adrian. This question is directed to you. You mentioned that in the policy that you have a monitoring role, but you took an internal audit report to shine a spotlight on this issue. So I'm wondering what assurance you can give us that there will be adequate monitoring and challenge going forward.
Well, yeah, I can certainly give you that assurance. You know, the monitoring of the report has been of the agency numbers has been done. Obviously, the audit report indicated a number of discrepancies, but I can assure you that, you know, there will be continued and ongoing monitoring of this policy and compliance with this policy.
And also challenge.
Of course, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, you know, we've got to appreciate that, you know, agency staff are an important part of any business at the end of the day. Of course, we have to look at cost effectiveness and so on. But with, you know, your numbers in cleansing seem to be much higher than anywhere else. We've actually talked about recruits and so on. But is there a big problem with regards to sickness and retention of staff here? And really, are you talking about employing another, is it 20 or 30 recruits and so on? Is the service actually undermanned at the end of the day, or underpeopled, I should say? Have we looked at that?
In terms of sickness absence first, we do have a relatively high level of sickness absence compared to the rest of the authority, but I suppose it has to be borne in mind that it is a frontline physical role, which means that if I had a sore ankle, I could come to work with my job, but a lot of our operatives wouldn't be able to come to work and would therefore be absent with the same ailment that other people could work in other sections. So I think that, you know, needs to be taken into account. We do work very hard in supporting our staff through sickness absence, and indeed there's a trial recently started across the place area, as well as I believe across social services, to ensure that we are following all our processes and doing everything we can to assist our staff to come back to work. And I know that Adrian responded earlier to an earlier question around the potential for phased returns and redeployment wherever possible. Although, again, in a physical frontline role, you know, there aren't any light duties as such. It is a physical, demanding job that the operatives undertake. In terms of manning levels, you know, we have a structure in place, and we still have 30-odd places that we need to recruit into, and we anticipate doing that over the current traineeship running, the one due to start in the new year, and then one further traineeship, which would give us a full complement of staff on a permanently employed basis. We also use other means to try to reduce our reliance on agency. We spent a lot of money over the last sort of 4 or 5 years in training a lot of our staff to LGV. So the aim is that every 3-person crew would have a driver with an LGV license, a carrier who loads the bags in the back, also with an LGV license, so that they can step in for their driver when the driver is off on holiday or on sickness. And then the 3rd person would be a carrier without a license, because, you know, again, a lot of our staff don't even drive, let alone would want to have an LGV license. So at the moment we have very little reliance on agency drivers. You know, again, a decision was made to train in-house and to give the experience in-house rather than pull in agency drivers. And more recently, the Cabinet have authorised funding, so we bring in a three-person crew at 6 o'clock in the morning, purely to step in should there be a last-minute withdrawal, because the team set itself up for the following day. They know how many people are on holiday, how many people are on the sick, so they tell the agency this is how many people we need, and that's who would due to turn up at 6 in the morning. If somebody then phones in sick, it would either be the case of the agency trying to scrabble around to find more people, or what we've done with the additional funding is have people in reserve, effectively those 3 people, so they can step in at the last minute to fulfill that role. And then if they're not needed, they can then go on a complaints vehicle to ensure we keep on top of complaints. So I think we have an adequate structure in place. We are come to the end of a recruitment drive to ensure that structure is fully occupied by permanent employees with a high quality of training, and we provide additional training to give flexibility to the staff, so that they both the service is more robust, but also the staff have a high level of qualification and a higher level of earning potential as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mike White and then Councillor Sarah Anderson, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I fully appreciate, obviously, with Chris is saying with the staff, as you say, this is the most demanding service that the public expect of us as an authority. You know, if we haven't got a person that turns up in the library, nobody knows any different. But if you got a refuse crew down, well, everybody in that area is of contact in the local authority. And as Chris said, it is a very, very demanding job. Chris, have you thought that perhaps, I don't know whether the cleansing part side of it was waste is based in the depot, because apparently what the system used to be that you would draw from them, so you made sure that all the crews were out on time in the morning, and then you would make up from agency with those other people, you know, for to cover those posts in street cleaning, you know.
Yeah, we to a degree we have. Again, when I talked about the 3 people coming in at 6 o'clock, we trialled that initially with cleansing staff, using one of our project teams, and also our cleansing traineeship that we ran. It was a mixture of cleansing and waste management, because on a Thursday and Friday, it's the nature of the way the rounds are created and the different needs of the different areas in the authority, that we put out more crews on a Thursday and Friday than we do on a Monday to Wednesday. So that led us to having because it's very difficult to recruit somebody and employ somebody on a 2-day a week, it meant that we were using more agency staff on a Thursday and Friday. So through the last cleansing traineeship, it was actually a shared role. So we needed 6 full-time equivalents in the cleansing area, but we took on 10 trainees with a view that they would then slot into a cleansing function from Monday to Wednesday, so litter picking, emptying litter bins, etc. Then Thursday and Friday, they would step into the waste collection teams and do the waste collections. And that has enabled us then to again reduce our reliance on agency staff and make the requirement for agency staff a little bit more consistent. So, and that's still in place now. So it is right that we link the 2 together as much as possible. Although we can't do that in its entirety, because one, it would have quite a significant impact on the cleansing operations. And a lot of the staff in the Pipehouse Depot, their first role is to go out into the city centre cleansing, which is obviously a prestige area for us. And then it becomes about capability and physical capability. And sometimes a lot of our waste staff who, if their physical capability reduces, over the years, they've often stepped into cleansing roles. So a lot of our cleansing staff potentially would struggle to undertake the waste collection function.
Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Question, Chris. Going back, I know these figures are high, but going back, our key workers, we had a health and safety problem where on waste collection, we had a problem with manning because they had to keep social distancing and you had to put them in different vehicles. I should imagine that put a lot of cost on your department. And would I be right if it wouldn't have been for COVID and that happening, you wouldn't have been using so many agency drivers?
Well, what you're right. We did have to employ convoy vehicles for some of our crews who needed that. But we did then use some of our cleansing staff to drive those vehicles. It did put a pressure on our agency staff, and it did increase the numbers. But in terms of finance, then that was covered by some Welsh Government funding, so it didn't hit the service financially. But it did increase our numbers. In the August figures supplied, I don't believe there are any convoy vehicle drivers on that. But going back to the May figures, then there would have been. Sorry, I'll just check the document. Yeah, we effectively had removed the convoy vehicles by the time these figures were in place, but that is one element of why it's now slightly reduced than it was.
Thank you. A final hand up, I believe, and that's Councillor Clive Lloyd before we go back to the leader.
Yeah, just very briefly an observation. I'll be very, very quick, but having been involved in this sort of area in a previous role as a cabinet member, maybe declaring interest, you know, I think we've got to have a bit of perspective around this as well. I know Councillor Anderson mentioned about the high numbers, but I think I'm right in saying, Adrian, that there's about 12,000 people employed by the council. So the you know, the numbers are really, really low in the overall terms of the council, albeit that they seem to be concentrated in an area where, as Councillor White has said, you know, is critical and needs to be fluid. And if we have a number of gangs taken out on a particular day, then that impacts the residents of Swansea immensely. So I suppose there has always got to be a bit of fluidity in terms of agency workforce in this particular area for sure. But I know that Chris has worked particularly hard. And again, going back to the numbers, when I was first involved, probably before you even joined the council, Chris, the numbers of agency workers was quite a bit higher than this. I can't recall the numbers, but it is come down from when we first started looking at addressing this and putting in place, as you say, a proper traineeship where people where we started employing people on a permanent basis with proper rates of pay and contracted conditions of service. And I think that's been you know, a real plus in terms of going forward. You've talked about the training of the LGV drivers as well. And again, historically, we'd have probably gone, as Chris said, straight out to agency for that. So that's all in-house now. And we should never forget the work that's been done in the past with Tir John, the landfill site, which when we took over, or when we came to power in 2012, was an absolute basket case in terms of its health and safety conditions being run by the outsourced company at the time. We took that back in-house and gave all those people permanent jobs and proper conditions of service. So I think overall, in the last few years particularly, a huge amount of progress has been made in this area. We have looked at setting up an agency pool ourselves, but I think costs have been prohibitive around that. So, you know, we've looked at it a number of times from memory, but you know, I think we have to keep this all in perspective, and there's some real good progress that has been made, and we have some firm footings in place in terms of making people permanent employees within the council.
Thank you for that, Clive, for the context. Rob, do you want to come back now, or do you want to wait till the end of the report?
No, that would be fine. Thank you, Chair. Look, I mean, I think Clive picked up a couple of the points I was going to make, but I just wanted to put that wrapper context on it, because as has been said, you know, we've been dealing with two real big issues here. One, obviously, being the pandemic, and the pandemic has absolutely distorted numbers in the last 18 months because of the fact that we have had to do extraordinary additional efforts in order to keep services running. I mean, services not only had to be redesigned potentially over a weekend period, and we had to then introduce additional service, but also those traditional services like waste, like social care and others, were under incredible pressure, not just because of the pandemic, but the impacts. So people being isolated, being taken out of the workforce. And of course, the last thing we would wish to do would be to leave the services in a position where they couldn't run effectively. So therefore, there has been a need, albeit reluctantly, to use additional agency staff during that period. But again, as Councillor Lloyd pointed to, the trend has been significantly downward over a number of years now, and that's what we need to continue. The policy of the administration is to always, get to a point where we're directly employing people. As the point was made, I think by Chris, there is always the need to meet the required standards, because we can't just automatically convert people from agency into permanent staff. They do have to go through the relevant requirements and relevant interviews, etc., and meet the standard to become a member of staff. And there is always that process. But absolutely, the point here is that we will continue to do all we can to reduce the reliance on agency staff. And coming to the final point around the internal pool, that is something, to be honest with you, that we looked at way back in 2014. And again, we came to the same conclusion then as we come to now, which is that, yes, it would be ideal if we could achieve it, but it is cost prohibitive. And given the variance of the types of roles that we're talking about here, it just wasn't something that we could feel we could run effectively. Because again, if somebody is stood down as a refuse collector, they can't be automatically set up or moved across to be a social worker. The skill sets are very different. So just because you have a pool of people doesn't necessarily mean it fixes the issues that you're grappling with in terms of the services. But what we have done over the last few years has been to have a redeployment pool, which has worked really well, where we've tried to match people who have become surplus in an area and retrain them and put them into another area. But that is very different from meeting an immediate need for a service where perhaps somebody's unavailable or we need to add additional resources. So again, very much welcome the opportunity to put that information before the committee. And our policy, as I've said, and our ambition remains to reduce as far as possible the use of agency staff and continue to employ people directly.
Thank you for that, Rob. As a committee, we're just looking for assurance that what you're saying, the aim of the council is to continue to reduce these numbers, and the content of this report is going some way to giving that assurance, particularly with the investment of sickness absence officers to support managers in getting a grip on this matter. So that's really helpful.
Chair, one thing I was going to suggest that might be helpful, because I know Councillor Lloyd raised this point as well, is when you see absolute numbers, they can look larger than they actually are. Because actually, when you compare them, because you often won't know how many people are employed in that area of the council, that service or that department. So it might be useful for the committee to have it also as a percentage of the numbers of staff employed in that area, because as Councillor Lloyd said, they are incredibly small numbers when you take the overall workforce.
I would absolutely agree with that, because I asked for those percentages when we looked at the sickness absence report, and the percentage was under 6% for sickness levels, which absolutely puts it in the right context. So I totally agree with that. The percentage of vacancy. If we can move on then, I believe Brian Rose, you're going to talk through.
Sorry, Chair, can I just make another point on exactly the same thing? The point that Councillor Peter Black raised earlier, that table is being a bit unfair, the one that says 168, because you quite rightly pointed out the actual figure was about 100. I think when you bring those figures again, by all means, put that into that main table, because then that gives us a better idea of what the costs are for and how many people are involved. Or put both, one of the two. I mean, it wasn't until Councillor Black pointed that out, I realised how much that skewed the figures. So that would be useful when we get this in future. Thank you.
Okay, should we move on to the section then?
Sorry, Chair, can I just pick up on that point? Sorry to interject. In the report, yes, of course, we've got the actual agency numbers, but also in the narrative we have indicated where those are FTEs. So, for example, in social services, the agency workers that have been employed have not been employed on a full-time ongoing basis. They have been provided to cover for frontline support, and that's just an example. And obviously in Chris's aspect of the report, there's a indicator there as to which are FTEs and which are headcounts. So just to clarify that point, that it is in the paper, and I've obviously reflected what was the discussion that we had at the June meeting.
Thank you. Okay then, Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I understand that the full detail that was provided wasn't included in the collated report. So I wonder if it'd be helpful if I share my screen with the full input that we provided. Then I can take you through a little bit more systematically, perhaps, and make sure that you are aware of that full detail, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Right. Can you see that? Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. The use of agency workers is very limited within the Education Directorate, outside of schools, because as you'd appreciate, the delegated schools budget is a very high proportion of the Directorate budget, more than 81% currently. If outside of schools, the most significant area by cost, which would then be 84% of the non-delegated spend, is in relation to our pupil referral unit, which is effectively a school, albeit without a delegated budget. So again, that is what you would expect. The other areas of costs are very small by comparison, as is apparent from the table, which I'm afraid is the detail that was omitted from the collated report, Chair. So I'll just sort of take it a bit slowly so you can take in the actual figures there. You can see the pupil referral unit figures there, by far the largest, as I say, at more than 84% of the total agency cost there in both years. Then as well as that, there are some smaller amounts in relation to additional learning needs support, the home tuition service, smaller still, and also our cleaning services. And we use agency workers on an absolute exceptional basis where we have no alternative really to maintain the provision of the service to the school and to the pupils. Where we do have no option but to use agency workers, the compliance measures that were indicated in the audit report are followed in respect of ensuring we have appropriate budget provision and approvals, as well as confirming the proper pre-employment checks and so on. All of those measures are part of obviously the wider assurance and internal control framework that operates within the Education Directorate. And then we also, as in the Place Directorate, we have been continuing to focus on effectively managing and further mitigating sickness absence levels within the Directorate, and we have appointed recently an additional post through HR in order to assist us in addressing and going another level further in terms of mitigating those absence levels. The early signs are very encouraging, and we do hope that it will be possible to extend that support. Now, in terms of then switching over in terms of arrangements in schools, it's recognised in the Welsh Government framework that schools are free to engage qualified supply teachers from basically wherever they feel appropriate to meet the needs of their school. Now that might be through direct employment, through a local authority supply list if that was operated, through a supernumerary sort of floating teachers, which a school could do in collaboration with another school even, or using a commercial supply agency, which is what we're considering here. Now, the supply agency framework came into effect in August 2019, and there are 19 local providers for Swansea. Now, under that framework, there's no need for schools to undertake procurement checks. There's a minimum level of pay for the workers, and so there are those advantages for schools to utilise an agency within that framework. And so schools have, and we continue to advise them about those advantages of using a framework agency. Now, in terms of the scale and the sort of compliance, schools in Swansea operate their own bank accounts and their powers for appointment. So that means that supply staff can either be appointed via an agency who are then paid on receipt of an invoice, or schools can appoint cover directly where the member of staff is then paid via our payroll system. Now, schools use a separate financial system to the remainder of the authority, and that means that school financial information needs to be interfaced each month with the authority system, and that means that it's not possible to determine the number of staff employed for cover either through supply agencies or indeed those paid on our payroll system. The inclusion of schools in any future developments in relation to the corporate systems would, of course, clearly be of assistance in that in the future, as well as improving resilience and efficiency of financial processes. So, you know, we would still be hopeful, you know, that might be possible in the future. So for that reason, it's not practical nor indeed meaningful to provide staff numbers. Any such numbers would need to come directly from each school by collating the detail from each invoice. And schools are seeking to effectively cover specific sessions and days when required, rather than on a full-time or a consistent basis. So a little bit like Chris was explaining, you know, the simple headcount kind of numbers can be a bit misleading. There has been an awful lot of work involved in obtaining and collating the cost information from each school. So I'm really indebted to my colleagues in finance who have drawn this together. And the details, as I say, are in these two tables. The first table there is in terms of the amount of school spend with supply agencies that are on the supply agency framework, and the second table details the totals that are of spend with agencies that are not on that framework. So if you take the actual proportions there, we're talking about 93.3% of payments that are made to agencies on the framework, and then the remaining 6.3% to agencies that are not. In terms of the 93.3% spend, because those are agencies on the framework, we would expect those to be, you know, compliant as a result, certainly. And of the remaining 6.3%, that doesn't mean that schools haven't performed all the relevant checks themselves. It's just that they would have to do that themselves rather than having the benefit of having gone through a framework agency. Now, final point is that schools will be bringing in supply that they pay via payroll, or indeed in other ways increasing the hours of the part-time staff, perhaps if that's an option. And I'm afraid we have no way of identifying those costs without going to individual schools to request that information. Now I know I've laboured that, but I thought that was worthwhile because, as I say, I'm afraid the full detail wasn't included in the report that you had in front of you. If I can clarify anything else, well, I'll come out to my screen first of all, and then I'll try and clarify anything else that I can help with. Right, should be back now.
Can I invite Ben Smith to comment on that before opening up wider, please?
Thank you, Chair, and my thanks to Brian for presenting that on screen. I thought it was important that it was made available, and Brian has very eloquently explained one of the conundrums we have. I think it does shine a very useful light on the overall picture, which the committee is interested in. But as Brian has made very, very clear, that scheme of delegation to schools and the use of FMS does limit our capacity to be able to respond immediately to requests for spending. But I think it's given a very broad picture of the overall arrangements, and that does demonstrate the degree of compliance and the overall degree of compliance, and to some extent a Shaw committee. The main point to emphasise is this is exactly the same we face with our overall financial arrangements. Because the core information is in FMS, the bare minimum is imported into the core ledger. Effectively, the primary records are held by the schools. Our external auditors are happy with it that we import the bare minimum into the main ledger, because the only obligation on the authority is to publish a single consolidated set of financial accounts for the authority and all schools individually. Individual schools produce management accounts. Obviously, governors have their own individual management reports, but there's no obligation to produce 90 sets of individual financial accounts for each authority, for each school. And so that does limit the ability to drill down into the detail. But I think Brian explained that very, very clearly and very, very well. But I just wanted to give you some wider context as to how we rely on it from an overall control point of view, and how Simon and his team rely on it from an audit point of view. A little bit unfortunate it wasn't there in the time in with the pack, but I still thought it was important that and my thanks to Brian for getting it on screen, because it does mean that members were able to see the overall process and take some comfort from the levels of overall assurance, which, as Brian has said, the operational decisions are taken predominantly by schools, and the amount spent by the LAA itself is very, very small. So my thanks to Brian for the context, and I think it was a useful intervention, albeit had to be on the screen and we all had to squint a little bit, but I am grateful for his assistance on it. So many thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Ben.
If I may, could I just thank you, Ben? Could I just put a bit of context, because I admitted I should have given the total delegated schools budget, because in the current year we're talking about spending of £167 million, and the vast bulk of that is of course on staffing costs at the end of the day. So just in proportion, sorry, I omitted to add that as I was going through. Apologies, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jeffrey Rayner.
Thank you, and thank you to Brian for bringing some additional data to the meeting. I think this is quite a complicated area, and it's one that yet again falls back on school governing bodies. In terms of the compliance, I could just add one level of extra assurance is that Estin checks this out quite thoroughly. And if it finds a school has not been using one of the listed frameworks, which are Welsh Government frameworks, not ours, then it really wants to know what a school has done to make sure that all the checks have been put in place. And in working out what the sums are, it becomes increasingly complicated when you realise that many schools are using teaching assistants who are actually qualified teachers who can step up in supply circumstances, but their actual position on the payroll will be their choice to stay as a TA. And also, although schools will go through an agency, it is not unknown that if a school finds a particular person an extremely gifted teacher and really good at filling that gap, they will also come to additional arrangements with that individual to pay more than a minimum in order to ensure that person stays with them rather than is moved around by the agency. So it's a really complicated picture, and I suppose we're quite lucky that we live in an area where we've got 2 universities producing teachers and producing updated training, in that we have quite a good range of people to choose from for both permanent staff and also to cover supply needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Regan, that's helpful. Julie? Julie?
Sorry, Chair, I haven't got my hand up.
Oh, it was up, it's down now. No more questions around that one? No?
Yes, sorry, Chair, I thought I had my hand up, seems to have disappeared. Yeah, thanks to Jen Reader, you know, for the information there. Thank you to Brian Rolls. I know the schools have actually got, you know, devolved budgets and so on, but it was mentioned by someone at the start, really, that procurement are actually carrying out an exercise with regards to, you know, agency workers. Surely they have the information with regards to how much schools spend at the present time on agency workers. Otherwise, how would they actually go out to tender on it?
Perhaps I can just come in. My understanding of that is, Councillor, is that tendering exercise is in relation to non-schools areas, not to schools. So I'm not sure, I don't believe that they would have that information, if you like, in respect to schools, as Brian has indicated in his presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. If I could come in here, it's important to emphasise that the framework list procurement exercise was undertaken by the Welsh Government, not us as an authority. So the question is, do we want to duplicate work that the Welsh Government has always done? And if we do, how do we match the 2 systems together?
Okay, thanks.
I've got, there are 3 hands up. I don't know whether they're from previous questions. Councillor Jeff Jones, Councillor Mike White and Councillor Robert Smith.
I have put my hand up, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to Brian, surely we as an education authority would probably provide guidance to schools on providing this information by the head teacher when they have the governors meeting or the finance part of the finance subcommittee meetings.
You're quite right. We would in all our advice, guidance, training to governors and with heads and deputies as well, we would stress the importance of the role of the governing body and then being given the appropriate information to fulfil that role. And as you rightly say, there is a key role for the governing body in terms of ensuring value for money and also proper financial processes and so on. And as Councillor Rayner said, you know, obviously then there's the scrutiny and assurance through various levels of audit and inspection and so on. So I hope that's reassuring.
Yes, yes.
Councillor Robert Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And, you know, as Cabinet Member, can I thank Brian for the report and the comprehensive report that he produced. And going back to some of the discussion, I think my predecessor, Councillor Jen Reader, is absolutely right. You know, the way that schools are approaching the need for cover, the arrangements they've got, there's a lot of discretion at school level. You know, for the last 10-15 years, schools have been encouraged to look at different types of arrangements. Many of them wanted as much of the cover as they could done in-house, so they could have people there who were part of the school system provide continuity of learning experience, knowledge of learners and so on. So I think, the use of agency staff has changed over the years, and it's something that it is still evolving, because we need to look as well at the issues like terms and conditions, opportunities for professional development of supply teachers. All of those issues need to be looked at, as well as the cost and the procurement methods. And I think this is a national agenda, and it's certainly something that we as a council in Swansea are aware of, and want to contribute to upskilling and ensuring as much professionalism as possible whenever schools, for the staff that the schools are bring in, whenever they are required to cover, because we don't want staff, permanent school staff, being taken out of other duties. They can't be taken out of other duties under the national agreement. The cover supervisors, whatever they're called in schools, can't cover it all themselves. So I think there will always be a place for agency workers. And as I said, it's a matter of making sure that we have a supply of high quality staff there as well.
There's a question or hands, then perhaps we can draw this to a close. Just a couple of points that I'd like to make. With regards to the ESTIN work and the checks, that is a source of assurance that the Governance and Audit Committee will certainly take on board. But we have been previously made aware that the ESTIN visits and checks were suspended during COVID. So, that's the reason why we're asking for management assurance through such reports. And also, this is a feature on our Chief Auditor's work programme for future. But I'm pleased to receive the content of this report, and I think we have had a level of assurance that the aim is to drive down agency costs, but recognising the challenges and the efforts that takes from the officers within the council in doing that. But can I thank everyone personally for your questions and comments and observations, and certainly the context around putting the perspective in percentage terms, because that does focus your mind and help us gauge as a committee where the risks lie. So if I can draw that matter to a close then, and thank everyone that's visited and attended. Simon Cockles, do you want to make one final comment?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to give some more assurance to members, really, in terms of school supply teaching, our standard school programme does look at the supply that is used in each school. So, as Brian has said, over 90% of the schools are using framework suppliers. But where they aren't using those framework suppliers, we do check that they've gone through the relevant checks as well. So there's a second check there for those. Those are not on the framework, essentially, which is very rare. But we do test and check that as part of our own individual school audits as well.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, then, if we can move on to agenda item 5, and if I can invite Councillor Peter Black, who's the Chair of Scrutiny, to take us through the Scrutiny Annual Report. Welcome, Councillor Black. Your Chair of Scrutiny role in taking us through this report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to take you through the report. It's there for information for you to read, but what the report, which is before you, seeks to do is to support the development of a strong relationship between Scrutiny and the Governance and Audit Committee. And although we do have distinctive roles, there are common aims in terms of good governance, improvements in performance and culture, and financial management. And essentially, it's about sharing information, making sure there's a regular conversation between Scrutiny and Audit, and with liaison between the two committee chairs. And that is, of course, helped by the fact that a number of councillors sit on both committees and others are involved in both Scrutiny and Audit activity. We just want to make sure that members are clear about each other's work, there is no duplication or significant gaps in work plans, and a way to ensure that issues can be passed between committees as appropriate. There has been a concerted effort over the last few years to do this, and you can see from the report the positive action already being taken to build the relationship. Obviously, it's up for members to be satisfied that that relationship is a good and healthy one, and that we are working together effectively, and consider whether there's anything else necessary to further strengthen the relationship. I understand you'll be coming to the committee on the 19th of October in Scrutiny Programme Committee, and we'll carry on that relationship in that way. But certainly I'm happy to answer questions and to continue to try to get that that close working relationship and build on it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Buck, yes, I would concur that I will be attending the scrutiny meeting on the 19th of October, and I would just re-emphasise everything you've said. It's important that we work together so we've got clarity on our mutual understanding of each other's roles in each of the committee structures, not to duplicate or have gaps in the work that we both do. Both are extremely important committees, and you know, only by working together and working in harmony that it'll make it work effectively and efficiently. I've got Julie Davis's hand up.
Thank you, Chair. In your self-improvement responses, number 4, you say that you need to strengthen follow-up of all scrutiny recommendations so that the response and difference made can be assessed. But in paragraph 320 of section C, you recognise that in many cases implementation of scrutiny recommendations continues beyond the process of formal monitoring. So I'm wondering how you're going to square that circle.
Well, essentially, the Scrutiny Programme Committee and the scrutiny panels are not executive bodies. We make recommendations to the executive, and we try to follow them through as best as we can. But it's up to the executive and the council whether they're willing to accept those recommendations. So obviously we carry out monitoring. I think the monitoring can be improved, I have to say, and we're certainly going to try to keep working on that. We do monitor, we do bring back cabinet members to ask them to account for the recommendations we've made to them. We ask them to explain if they're not prepared to accept a recommendation, why not? And at the end of the day, we have to accept their judgment because we are not an executive body. But certainly the scrutiny process is one of testing, it's of questioning, and making recommendations, and it can be it's meant to be a positive process which is there to improve the performance of the council. And I think in that sense we do the best we can, but at the end of the day, the way the council is set up under the 2000 Local Government Act, it is the executive who makes the final decisions on whether or not those recommendations are to be accepted.
Right, and if recommendations are accepted, who is responsible for following those up and monitoring the implementation? Well,
we would try to do that through scrutiny. I mean, if the cabinet accepts a recommendation, we'll come back to that after an appropriate period, and if we have a report, and we will go through that and say, well, okay, and have the cabinet member in front of us, and we say to that cabinet member, okay, you've accepted this recommendation, can you explain to us how it's been implemented? And that's all part of the scrutiny process, trying to keep on top of that. I think we need to do a bit better on that respect, but we are working towards improving on that.
Okay, thank you.
Questions. The report is for noting. It's very detailed. It just shows the.
Sorry, Chair, you're breaking up. I can't.
The report is very comprehensive,
yeah,
and demonstrates how much work the scrutiny has done, albeit there's been some difficulties with the COVID. And you know, the work is extremely complete and comprehensive. I've got 2 councillors' hands up, Councillor Jeff Jones and then Councillor Rayner. Jeff Jones.
Yeah, my apology, Chair. My hand had been left up by mistake.
Councillor Jeff Rayner.
Thank you. On that question of monitoring and follow-up, can I say, as a former cabinet member, not only did we get the recommendations at the time of the report, we were asked to respond, do you accept or not accept, or what is your view? But there also used to be a 12-month follow-up. Yeah. Where are you now in delivering what you said you would take on board?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something which we are endeavouring to do. A lot of this work is now being done by the performance panels. So, for example, in your former role, Councillor Rayner, there is an education performance panel which you reported to on many occasions, which meets on a regular basis. And because they're meeting on a regular basis and focusing entirely on that one area, which of course is a significant part of the council's budget, they're able to follow through on a regular basis. And similarly with social services, which is another significant spender. So those panels are doing a lot of that work. In the scrutiny performance panel, we're trying to be flexible in terms of filling in gaps, taking on board issues which come up as they arise, and also if there's a particular matter which suddenly comes up which needs to be focused on, we can take that on as part of that. So, for example, the recovery plan from COVID is a very good example of how the scrutiny performance panel and the audit committee as well are trying to work together to focus to scrutinise how that is being implemented and what needs to be done to ensure that works in the best possible way.
Councillor Terry Hennigan.
Yeah, only briefly. The report and recommendations, when they go to Cabinet, they don't just go to Cabinet. I think it's worth saying that whoever presenting the report actually attends Cabinet and produces a report to the Cabinet direct. And then it's a rough idea how many people are going to accept the recommendations and those who not. Someone said that, 12-month follow-up. I'm aware of some of the members actually start monitoring after 3 or 4 months. Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely keep on top of it, Terry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. If there are no questions, then thank you for presenting the report, Peter. What I'm going to suggest, Peter, if you are content with that, is in the report at Appendix 3, you've got the Scrutiny Programme Committee Work Plan.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Jeremy if he can attach that to the Governance and Audit Committee Work Plan, so that this committee is always minded of what's going on at scrutiny at every meeting. I think it gives us an opportunity just to take reflection of exactly what's happening in each of the months that we meet. So if you're content with that, then perhaps Jeremy can action that for me, so that your scrutiny work plan will be sitting alongside our work plan.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Okay, lovely. You can do that for me then. Okay, as that was report for noting as well, if we can now move on, and if I can invite Ben Smith to go through the Auditor General for Wales review of Town Centre Regeneration report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report is also a for information item and is a slightly unusual one, and that's one of the reasons why it's on the agenda today. As the letter itself indicates, there is an obligation on us to draw your attention to it. It's a bit like the previous discussion where it's awareness raising as to what reports have come out. And there is an obligation in the letter that it is brought to committee, Governance and Audit Committee, that it is shown on the agenda. There is a minute noted that you have received it so that the loop can be completed back to the Auditor General and Audit Wales. So I'll be looking for, even though it's a for information item, that there is some sort of minute that notes that. I chose, because it came in at relatively short notice, to put it on only for information and to leave it as a link only to the national report for a couple of reasons. We've yet to fully test what's the most appropriate way for systemically reporting these, and we've now made arrangements for a meeting with relevant officers and yourself, Chair, to decide how to make sure all of these are captured in future, not only through Audit Wales, but a whole raft of other regulators, and how we formally document, record and report back. So that's the first reason. The second reason was because it's a national report rather than one specifically to Swansea, I took a view for the expediency for getting this one on quickly to the agenda. It wasn't best served by adding another 40-50 pages to the agenda pack. But of course, the corollary is you've got to go and click through to find what the national report says. So in due course, once we've met, and there will also be views, no doubt, from committee members as to which is the best way to do it. But the final reason for not putting the report on is it's an unusual one at this stage because it's a relatively early doors report. Those of you that have read the recommendations and the main report, there are 6 recommendations. At least half of them are solely to the Welsh Government, the others to local government, and a request for there being some joint working. So at this stage, I think it's a bit too high level strategic for you to have meaningful officer recommendations. And that's the other reason for putting it on as a for information item. I am finally aware that the Welsh Government is going to very soon respond formally to the report and also be announcing what arrangements it's going to make for including interested parties such as representatives of local government on such reports. And that's why I've brought it here. But I think the wider debate will come in due course, Chair, because this just happens to be something I'm interested in, something that happened to come across my desk, and something that I happen to know what Welsh Government is proposing to do with the national response and how it's going to develop those policy recommendations working in partnership in due course. So I wanted to get it on so that it is formally done as one of those first early reports that falls into that category. I'm more than happy to be guided by members as to whether they think it helpful or unhelpful to either keep the agenda thin or put the whole lot in. And also in due course, we'll have to think about what's appropriate for different types of reports. Some reports are very granular and very specific. If they're solely to do with Swansea and their finance, they're going to come in here anyway. Some of them are quite granular and of use, but some of them are quite high level strategic. And I think this one is quite a high level strategic one, and so was appropriate on this occasion for it only to be the briefest dimensions. But as I say, I'll be guided by members. We will meet in due course to work out how best to capture it, because the bottom line is no single officer or member is a controlling mind over all of these things, and we've got to bottom that given Audit Wales expectations that we evidence systemically how we achieve it. So that's the main reason for it being on. Those recommendations are things like, just for flavour, Welsh Government should review non-domestic rates nationally. It should work with local authorities to decide how best to do it. Local authorities should work with Welsh Government to work out how best to do integrated transport and car parking arrangements. It starts quite narrow, but it's quite broad. And I think there's probably several years worth of policy work in this once the rapid sort of task forces are set up and recommendations made back to ministers. So I am looking for a minute, even though it's an information item. I'm conscious I've talked enough on the specifics and the wider bit, and I can see some members have indicated, but I wanted to give you some contextual background, Chair, and also to alert members to our plans to try and meet with relevant officers to work out how best to manage many more of these coming through the system in the same way. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the heads up. And as you made reference to the meeting that's in the diary now to look at the reporting functions and the role of the committees, or whether it's governance and audit or scrutiny or an executive-led meeting, I think that needs to be bottomed out sooner rather than later, because it's not only this report that's going to come that way. There are other reports. And I've got 2 hands up. Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Ben is absolutely right. This is a very high-level report, and a lot of the recommendations are there for Welsh Government, though, frankly, they should have sorted business rates out some time ago, in my opinion. But I think there is a couple of recommendations in there which seem to me to be very apt, especially given the fluidity of the council's own position in terms of developing the city centre. There's a lot of work going on in the city centre, of which 1 or 2 recommendations are particularly relevant to that. And it does seem to me that this report might be usefully given to the Development and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel, whose chair, of course, is a member of this committee, just so they could look at it to see where they want to do anything with it, and maybe take into account when they come to scrutinise the work that is ongoing in the city centre, particularly around parking, which is one of the issues which is highlighted there as part of that. So that's obviously up to Jeff Jones whether he wants to take that on board, but it does seem to me that would be a useful destination for this report to go, given that we actually have a scrutiny panel specifically looking at development and regeneration around the city centre.
Absolutely agree. Councillor Rayner.
Thank you, and thank you to Ben. In the first place, I am happy to support a motion, well, a statement that Ben has brought this paper towards us, and it should be a written minute. So happy with that suggestion. The other problem, and I think Ben touched on it, is it's quite a complicated document. And perhaps foolishly, I started pushing some of the links, thinking, oh, who are our small towns? Well, I ended up learning that Swansea was a Category 3 city. And then to my amazement, places like Merton were also small towns. So I would be really happy to have, shall we say, a training session or a walkthrough of this paper as part of the learning experiences and training programs for councillors, because I think it's quite difficult. We begin off with the big statement, there's 193 places in Wales with over 2,000 residents, and you think, oh, so that's the definition of a town, is it? And then you look elsewhere and it's not quite the definition of a town. There's other places which seem to move from designated council places, maybe a town but not a city. And given that this is a toolkit to help us direct resources and monitor how we behave, I think there is quite a bit of unpacking, basic explanation to be handed out so that councillors, whether on the Governance and Audit Committee or in scrutiny, can actually feel confident that they're looking at the right issues. But certainly happy to make sure that we have this as a written minute.
I agree with that. It needs to be appropriately minuted, and I think this is just the start of something bigger that will grow. And it's important that we can take appropriate action sooner. And I think that this meeting in the diary is quite soon, I believe, in October.
That's right, Chair. The meeting is next week, because I think you're right. This is the start of many that will need to be more formally regularised in terms of awareness sharing and raising. And Councillor Rayner is equally quite right. It's quite a complicated report. I mean, I was personally interested in it, and it happened to come across my desk. 3/4 of it's got very little to do with me directly in the day job, but obviously everything boils down to money at the end of the day. And I found myself equally disappearing into the nether regions of what some of those clickable links were, some of which I found more helpful than others. So I didn't want to bore you all with the full stuff in the report, but we will look to unpack it next week, Chair, with relevant officers. There's a lot of stuff in there, and as I say, some of it I think is a long burner for several years, but Councillor Peter Black is also quite right. Some of them are specific on each authority to consider what they're going to do. Quite a lot of unpacking to be done on this, but I'm at least pleased I spotted this one, got it logged in the system. It will be recorded as such. It can then be fed back to Audit Wales, but we do need to make sure that we've got it a more robust system. It's going to be challenging for some of the wider things, because as I say, there isn't one officer or one member who sees all the reports, and that's the bit I'm particularly keen for us to try and systemically address when we do meet. It's next week, to give committee again assurance that we've got mechanisms for capturing these things appropriately. It just happened to be the first one that came across my desk, and I was particularly interested in it. But it will involve dealings with a number of other officers outside of finance, predominantly in economic development, regeneration and other place services, as Councillor Black has said. So thank you.
Be interested to see the Welsh Government response to the report as well, see what they've got to say. Any more hands, or are they legacy hands? I got Peter and Jennifer's hands still up. No more questions on that one?
Yeah, just a quickie. Is this something new that Audit Wales are starting to do?
Yes, it is, Councillor Walton. Effectively, in June, they wrote saying they expected all such reports to be formally documented on the agenda, formally minuted, formally sent back to them, as well as any stated actions that the Governance and Audit Committee wished to feed back. On this particular one, as Councillor Black and myself have said, it's so high level, I didn't think it was appropriate for there to be any immediate recommendations to feed back, because it's quite a long burning report. But it's the first that's come across my desk since that change of stance at the end of June. You've had other reports, but of course they've been very granular and specific to Swansea. So it's been the annual accounts report, it's been the financial governance report. So Mr. Garcia has come and presented them directly to this authority. But therein in itself lies an interesting matter, because now that we've received the Swansea specific one on financial standing arrangements, there has since been very imminently recently the Audit Wales report on the standing of globally local governments. So that one probably needs to be fed into the mix so that you're aware of that one, even though it's probably slightly less interesting than the one that is very close to home in terms of Swansea. So it is new. The couple you've had so far have been very specific to us, which would have been ordinary business, but there's going to be an awful lot more of these, especially when you sort of roll out to the wider regulators. And that's the bit we're going to try and unpack next week as to how we capture all of these. And as I say, presumptuously on this one, because it was high level, I decided not to put the whole lot in the pack. if there are some that we feel need to be in the pack may swell rather substantially. Fortunately, because they're electronic, you won't bow under the weight of the agenda packs, but that is something also to unpack when we do meet next week.
Jason Garcia, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Just to add to what Ben said, really, yeah, we do national themed reports, have done for some time, as to how you deal with them. It's nice to hear that you're looking to formalise that, so you take them to the relevant committees. All of these type of reports, are on our website. As Ben alluded to, we've recently done a financial sustainability national piece of work and local reports. There's a picture of public services report that's on our website. And if you do go onto our website, you'll also see a situation whereby you can search on Swansea and see all the reports that are relevant to Swansea. So just a bit more information really for members.
Thank you, Jason. And that website, Audit website, is very user friendly as well. And I'm a regular visitor, Jason.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Councillor Terry Hennigan. You speak us off, Terry.
Yeah. Are we paying the Welsh Audit Office for services they provide to us?
We very briefly, Chair, we provide we pay Audit Wales an agreed audit fee, and any specific bits on top that is directly linked to the work they do for us. We do not directly pay for the national reports, but obviously the Auditor General has to make arrangements to cover his overall fee income. So we don't pay directly for any of the national reports, but I think the Auditor General and his staff are keen to make sure that members of this committee and the wider council are aware of all of their publications. And I would echo what the chair has said. I'm also a regular user of the Audit Wales site and find it very user friendly, and I'm always on the lookout for what's happening in other authorities and the national stuff so that we can learn from best practice.
I was just thinking of the extra work that might come in. So it's okay. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Councillor Rayner.
Thank you. While we have Mr. Garcia here, I wonder if we could clarify this point. I did see the notification way back in June that all statutory reports need to come towards the Governance and Audit Committee, and included in that was the mention of Eston. Now, are we talking about Swansea as an authority Eston reports, or are we going to see Eston reports on all of our 94 schools? It wasn't clear in the statement, it just said all reports, and I'm thinking, yeah, I can see a really good reason for a statutory report on Swansea as an authority, but really, do you want to know what Dunban Primary School is doing?
Jason, do you want to come on that?
I don't know the specific answer, I'll be honest, Councillor. It's something I'm happy to take away and ask, but I would be surprised if it was asking to bring all individual school reports to yourselves, because obviously the quantum would be huge.
I was just going to comment very similarly, Chair. It's an unfair one in one sense for Mr. Garcia to be out to answer in terms of the Estin stuff, but he can check, and I would have adopted exactly the same approach, which is I'm looking to be reasonable and proportionate, so things that are of significant substance come rather than every individual report. And as I say, we will equally unpack and work out what's best for the ones that, even where we do determine we think they should come, whether they are so material that the whole report should be nested within the pack, or whether it is appropriate to link them. But I think Mr. Garcia is right. I would read it the same way. I don't think it's meant to be everything. It's meant to be what is reasonable and proportionate at the end of the day to give you assurance as a Governance and Audit Committee, and you wouldn't need to see the minutiae of every individual report. So I'm sure he's absolutely right. But this one in particular prompted me because it was actually on it. So again, it's not a statutory report in one sense. It is a report of the Auditor General with a set of questions posed to Welsh Government and local government. But this one specifically did say and laid out out the Auditor General's expectation that this one would come. So being a good officer, I did. And equally, because I look at what other authorities are doing, I see a number of other authorities have taken this exact same report to their Governance and Audit Committee. Some, I believe, with just a short link. Some have produced the whole report. So again, we're all sort of learning the best way to do it. But I'm sure Mr. Garcia is right. I can't envisage it's ever going to be practical for you to have every single item. It's going to be what's reasonable and proportionate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If there are no other questions on that paper, thank you, Ben, for bringing that to our attention. And it's very helpful to have the heads up, I think, for this.
Can I ask, Chair, that he does refer to the development scrutiny panel, just so for information if need be?
Yeah. Totally agree with that.
Yeah, I take that on board. I will ensure that it actually comes to our when we get more information, actually, or more meat on the bone.
Yeah, absolutely agree. If we can move on then to agenda item 7, which is the action tracker. Again, this is for information. There are some actions that are still outstanding, but I believe all the dates are in the status of when we'll expect those updates to come back to the committee. So unless there are any questions on that, I know there's a couple of actions that are outstanding around the tracking of the Audit Wales recommendations and considerations being given to what other committees use in other local authority areas by Adam. And the work plan is another one that's outstanding in having all the new areas of the roles and responsibilities of the Governance and Audit Committee being incorporated into the work plan. So unless there are any questions on that, I'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the work plan. And as I say, I've shared with Jeremy the additional areas I think we need to build in so that we can see a more completed work plan for the next meeting, if that's appropriate. And I'd make a plea to Adam, Ben and Simon to assist Jeremy if any assistance is needed. And we talked prior to the meeting on things that I think need to be programmed in before the end of April. But I'd welcome further discussion on that work plan in the November meeting, please. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to draw the meeting to a close. And once again, thank you everyone that's participated this afternoon. It's been a very useful, informative and assuring committee meeting today. And stay safe, keep well, and I'll see you next month. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.